Hello, BookTube. I have some mail for you today, starting off with a few periodicals, including The New Yorker, with this seasonal change cover. There you have the black outlines, the black silhouettes of everything normal inside, a riot of color outside. Very, very interesting. And there's an article in here, I haven't read it yet. There's an article in here by Julian Lucas. The summary of the article on the table of contents says what the Foundation TV series misses about Asimov. And I really want to read that. That sounds really, really interesting. The thing I want to share with you today out of this issue, since I'm always sharing my mail with you, is the letters page. And ordinarily, when we're in more literary journals, I show you the letters page because the letters page is where the scraps happen. That's where people start to fight with each other. In the New Yorker, that's not quite that way. The literary stuff in the New Yorker is still very much the so-called back of the book feature. You'll have a couple of pieces about writing or literature based, but they'll be after the main articles. And the two letters that comprise this letter column are about one of those main articles. There was an article a couple of issues ago about long COVID. So people who've had COVID-19, they survive, but they don't quite recover. They retain maddening symptoms, sometimes very serious symptoms, for a very long time after they've had COVID, after they are no longer actually showing that they have the virus. I think it's a fascinating subject. I watch a whole bunch of YouTube channels devoted to breaking down COVID information. I read a lot because, as I've said on this channel, this is history that we're living through. This is the biggest thing that in the lifetime of most of my viewers, the two most significant historical things are world-changing and also universal, which is not a given by any means. I mean, the last gigantic historical event, World War II, did not affect every single person in the world. There were plenty of people who just went about their lives. There were plenty of people who did that. There were plenty of people who didn't. There are plenty of people who did. Whereas the two big historical events in the lifetime of a lot of people watching me right now are things that have literally affected all of our lives. And the people who went through those experiences can remember before those things had even happened. So they're discrete things. They're not large societal changes. They're discrete things. The first is the rise of the internet, which has completely changed all of our lives. And the second is COVID-19, which affected all the countries in the world, had mortality rates from all around the world, changed governments, shut down economies. So, that's why I pay so much attention to this subject. And these letters get at a slightly more individual level. So I want to read you both of them. They're both from disgruntled readers. The first one, the New Yorker's article on long COVID, in which I was the central subject, was a profound affront to everyone suffering the long-term sequelae. New Yorker letters. No matter how somber the subject, there's still going to be New Yorker letters. That is SEQUELAE. Oh, you don't know what that means? Anyway, of even mild and asymptomatic cases of COVID-19. The piece included no interviews with doctors or scientists directly investigating long COVID, and no interviews with patients battling the disease. I participated in the article with the understanding that it would be a profile of me and of Survivor Corps, the world's largest grassroots COVID movement, which I founded. But it proved to be something entirely different. It depicted my organization as anti-science, even though we have reinvented what it means to be citizen scientists by co-authoring scientific papers and creating a system in which patients and researchers partner to advance science in line with patients' needs. Your writer laments a gulf between activists and scientists. He doesn't do enough to show how our work bridges the divide. The article was also wrong to dispute the extent to which the symptoms of long COVID can be tied to the coronavirus. In 2005, Oliver Sacks co-authored an op-ed in the Times warning that a novel flu virus could cause a shadow pandemic of neurological complications similar to encephalitis lethargica, or sleeping sickness, that followed the 1918 influenza epidemic. Such post-viral diseases, he wrote, have been recorded since the time of Hippocrates. Contrary to the article's disappointing both sides approach, it is wrong to dispute the lived experience of those suffering from long COVID and the physiological basis of their symptoms. In doing so, the piece fell grievously short of the New Yorker's standards for medical reporting. And that comes from Chevy Chase, Maryland. And although it has a couple of red flags, it has definitely a couple of red flags. I don't recall anything in the New Yorker article that is what was it again? Disputing the lived experience of those suffering from long COVID. There's a thing that we're calling long COVID, and people do suffer from it, and they're incapacitated even sometimes over a year after they've had COVID. I don't recall the article disputing the lived experience, and I think we can maybe agree. Well, actually, I always say that. I think maybe we can agree, but on this channel, we seem to be in agreement on a lot, except that you all like the wrong authors. I think we can agree that although you can respect someone's lived experience without granting it the status of scientific fact. And the same thing is true, the same kind of red flag is raised in the first paragraph, where it says that the author has helped to found a group that has reinvented what it means to be citizen scientists by co-authoring scientific papers and creating a system in which patients and researchers partner to advance science in line with patients' needs. Of course, if you advance science in any kind of line, if you have an objective, then you aren't doing science. If you're trying to say, all right, well, we're going to do science, but we're going to do it this way, well, then you've said that you're not 100% concerned with following the evidence where it leads. And the minute you put expectations on evidence, you're no longer doing science. Now, I don't know that that's true of this, what was it called again? The Survivor Corps. I have no idea. I've never read any of these papers. I'm sure I wouldn't be qualified to read them. But when I read the letter, I mean, those two things raise red flags. But when I read the letter, I thought back to that article. In fact, I wish I still had it. But I don't as yet, as you know, if you watch this channel, I no longer let my periodicals pile up read. I've never let them pile up unread, but when they're read, I do something with it. I don't just stick them somewhere. I don't have a filing cabinet, and I don't want one back. So instead, what I do is pull the stuff out that I thought was really striking or interesting and find a home for it in a book, which means I'm usually pulling out book-related stuff. In a case like this, where there's a long piece about long COVID that I thought was interesting, ordinarily I would pull it out, trim off the edges, write the date at the bottom if it's not there at the bottom, fold it, and then put it in the appropriate book. It's not a book review. So in this case, it would go in a big, brickish 800-page study of the COVID-19 pandemic, the way it changed the world, its biology, the official responses to it. Rather than being a book about any one of those things, it would be the first big, huge book on COVID-19, and that book doesn't exist yet. And I'm not going to wait for it. Obviously, I'm not going to pile up pieces waiting for hypothetical books. So I know that something's in the works, fine. But as far as I know, nothing is. Or when it gets to me, it will get to me. So I don't think I kept that article. But looking back on it, after reading this letter, I thought, the author's right. The author of the letter is right. The piece was a little bit on the dismissive side. And the next letter is someone writing in saying the exact same thing, only from Marina Del Rey, California, on the side of the country. I participated in the New Yorker's piece on long COVID, sharing the extremely personal and painful story of the suicide of my wife, Heidi Ferrer, which was caused by the excruciating physical symptoms that she suffered during a 13-month-long battle with the disease. I thought that the New Yorker, above all other publications, would handle her story with grace and sensitivity, but the article caused my family and me great pain. It got a crucial detail of the event wrong. My son did not find his mother's body, as the article implied, because in one of my proudest moments as a parent, I shut the door instantly before he could see it. Much more insidious was the article's feckless assertion that others, pointing out that Ferrer never tested positive for the virus, have questioned whether COVID is to blame for her death. Who, I have asked, are these others? The answer has never been revealed to me. If I had known that the magazine was going to call into question the cause of my wife's death, I wouldn't have cooperated with the story. My wife fought the bravest battle I have ever witnessed against a virus that robbed her of everything, including her ability to sleep, in a process that began with tremors and internal vibrations that struck her in a detail the New Yorker chose to omit weeks after getting the Moderna vaccine. The publication's engagement in whataboutism regarding long COVID is harmful, and an insult to those who are suffering from this sinister disease, many of whom are being gaslit by the medical community every day. They deserve better. Now, once again, there are red flags here. First of all, the very first thing has nothing to do with COVID. It was the article caused my family and me great pain. No, it didn't. It was words on a page. You didn't suffer pain from the article. And the longer we just let that sit, the longer we let one of the most fundamentally damaging weirdo leftist assertions of the 21st century, which is that words are violence, the longer we let that happen, the longer we let that go unchallenged in the discourse, the worse it is for all of us. Because if words are violence, what's next? We don't permit violence, do we? So on the one hand, that's a tiny, tiny little red flag, just the kind of irritated, grumpy old man detail you would come to expect from one of my videos. The other red flag, though, is that whole business about what actually caused his wife's illness. And, you know, when the author of the letter says that I have not been informed who these others are, well, the New Yorker's piece was investigative journalism. You're not under any obligation to be informed who the sources are. A source, at least one, in terms of the writer's view, called into question whether or not his wife even had COVID-19. And, you know, on the one hand, it seems ghoulish to speculate about that when the woman is dead. But on the other hand, you know, if you're making a claim that she took her own life because she was worn out and depressed about dealing with long COVID, if you're making that claim, and you're doing it publicly, it's one thing if you circulate it among your friends or your family, but if you're making that claim publicly, it seems like it's behooving on you to simply demonstrate. It's not a big deal. It doesn't have to take more than a second to simply demonstrate that that's the case. Specifically by ruling out the presence of other things that might have been the culprit. So those tiny, tiny red flags. But the thing that really struck me about this letter, I don't know that the writer of the letter in Marina Del Rey and the writer of the letter in Chevy Chase, Maryland, I don't know that they coordinated, but they both raised the specter of whataboutism, of both sidesism. Right alongside each other, they raised that specter, that the New Yorker was intentionally increasing doubt on a subject in order to feel even-handed somehow. I don't really know how. The reason that, I mean, it's fascinating to me, and I wonder what will happen as a result of it. Oftentimes, once the New Yorker has aired the initial disagreement, the discussion moves onto one of their forums. And oftentimes I lose the thread there. I just don't bother to go and hunt it out. I don't think it will reoccur in the letters page. I don't think they'll respond to it. They don't in this letters column. But the reason why such letters resonate a little more approximately with me than they would as just an article in the New Yorker is because, of course, on BookTube, a booktuber on BookTube that I watch all the time whenever he makes a video, Sean Stanfast, over in England, had COVID and has long COVID. And it's absolutely real. I mean, if the writers of these letters are correct in implying that the New Yorker was sort of implying that long COVID isn't real, then the New Yorker was dead wrong. It is certainly real. It's not like I have seen implications like that, insinuations like that in the mainstream media and on, of course, Reddit, that people who claim to have long COVID are just malingering, that they just don't feel like, you know, get up and walk it off or that sort of thing. And I just think that's absolutely ridiculous. I'm sure some people may be doing that, but you'd have to do nothing more than watch one of Sean's videos. He clearly marks them, videos that aren't about books, when he tells you ahead of time, I'm going to give you a medical update. Because he got the mother of all double whammies at the beginning of the year, where he had not only a heart attack, but COVID, and now has long COVID, which is not understood and which is not completely studied, but which seems to me to be incontestably real. And when you listen to him talk about having long COVID, he talks about how there are only narrow, tiny little windows in the day where he feels like he has the mental concentration to read. And if you are readers out there will know that no one would say that if that weren't true, and no one would want that to be true. For what? I don't even know what the reason would be. So just fascinating. I thought I'd raise it here. I don't know what kind of response will follow, but I think it will be online. But the next two periodicals are much more centered on me. The first one is the Vineyard Gazette. And this is a broadsheet newspaper for the island of Arthur's Vineyard, with just lovely photos. Of course, the main cover article was there was a nor'easter. If you've been watching this channel, again, you would know there was a nor'easter, sort of a, for those of you who don't live in the American Northeast, it's kind of a stillborn hurricane, kind of a hurricane that almost but wasn't. So you have a big storm that the worst nor'easters are very slow moving, and then they reach a certain conflux of the land shelf and also water temperature and just stall in place. We've had winters in the past here in New England where a northeaster would bring winds, floodwaters, and especially snow, and those all would be bad enough, but then the storm just wouldn't go anywhere. It would just stick around for 3 or 4 days. And we had one of those last week. We had a nor'easter that here in my little leafy area of Boston, the worst we got was just somber skies and a large amount of rain. But the Vineyard is an island. They got hit a lot harder, and so that's the main article here about the widespread damage, the wires that were down and whatnot. The reason why I smile so much with the Vineyard Gazette is because I am their book reviewer, and it's the off season. it's the off season. We don't have as many books or as many readers. In the winter, the Vineyard is a summer resort island, so we don't have as many of either one of those things. I keep dropping discreet little gentle hints to my editor to feel free to send me books. But I don't have a review in this one. But the next paper that we're going to look at, these old-fashioned newspapers, I know, it's such an old-timey radio hour here. The next one we're going to look at is one that we've seen before. From Iowa. From Taylor County in Iowa. This is the Bedford Times-Press, 147-year-old local Iowa newspaper. Very thin thing, very much a one page. You have loving full color coverage of all of the Titanic Bedford young athletes, but you also have local stuff, communication systems, city council candidates and their smiling portraits and whatnot. It's very much a small town Iowa newspaper. I've learned in the last month or two that there are quite a few more of those small-town Iowa newspapers than I thought, and I'm willing to bet that's true in every state in the union. A global search, a 30,000-foot search using, Google, will not turn these papers up. But they do exist, and they don't go out to many people. They have a small readership, but they are exactly what I remember loving. One of the things I remember loving about Iowa. Now, if you've been watching this channel, you will remember that for years now, I have been saying that in addition to appearing everywhere else in the printed world, I am kind of the Virginia Creeper of book reviewers. In addition to appearing everywhere else, and that's not to say I'm not grateful for the places where I appear regularly. I'm very grateful for the Vineyard Gazette. I'm very grateful for Christian Science Monitor. Very grateful for Kirkus Reviews, for instance, even though my pieces aren't signed. But I mentioned for years now that in addition to all that, I have 3 dream venues. One in Ireland, one in India, and one in Iowa. The 3 I's. A small paper in Iowa, India, and Ireland that I would like to appear in. Run a review for them. Something like that. Not the big papers, not anything like that. I realize those are crowded venues, but a smaller thing. Somewhere where that might be happy to have me, so to speak. And thanks to the good offices of Bill Rutenberg at the Rutenberg Library, I knew this was already true, but I wanted to wait until I had a physical copy to show you. Thanks to Bill Rutenberg, that has now happened. You are going to recognize those 2 faces. Yes, you are. You're going to recognize those 2 faces. The column is called Ex Libris, and it is all about all things bookish. And it's weekly. The Bedford Times-Press is a weekly newspaper in small-town Iowa. And they have a new book columnist, me. Now, the graphic for every subsequent Ex Libris column is not going to be that. This first column is a little bit shorter than my normal column, and my wonderful editor at the Bedford Times-Press thought maybe the first column should be kind of sort of introducing you. A little bit of a conversation about who you are. And I think we both thought that a better idea for a graphic for that would be me and the bean. So there we are. And this is going to appear in the Bedford Times-Press every week until the end of time. So I thought I would show it to you because I was waiting until I got a print copy in the mail. And I did today, and I already knew that the column was up. I've written quite a few columns by now, and I totally underestimated the sheer effect that seeing this would have. Seeing myself in an Ex Libris book column in Iowa for the first time in 40 years was an absolute thrill. An absolute thrill. And it's going to continue. And of course, I don't do calls to action on this channel at all. But nevertheless, if you feel so inclined, what calls to action I might give you would be threefold. One, go to the website of the Bedford Times Press. I'll leave the link down below. The Bedford Times Press puts out the whole issue as an electronic version for free, much like Big Canoe News in northern Georgia. So in 2021, the Deep South in Georgia got a brand new print newspaper book section editor. And Iowa got a brand new print newspaper book columnist. They put out the Bedford Times Press puts out an electronic version that isn't paywalled in any way, so you can just go and look at it. Or no, that's actually not true. I believe the Bedford Times Press does charge you for the electronic version, but it's far less than for the paper version. But I checked before I made this video. I didn't obviously check enough, but I'm still rather off the walls ecstatic about this whole thing. I will get my details straight eventually. The point is, I will leave a link to the website of Bedford Times Press, and if you go to that website, you can, if you dig around, you can find a way to subscribe. Now, you might, on a normal basis, you would think it would be insane that I would ask you to subscribe to a small town local Iowa newspaper, but that's where I am. That's where I am. And my column is not local books at all. I don't do that with any venue that I do like this, whether it's editing at Big Canoe News or being a columnist for the Bedford Times Press. I believe there's no such thing as a local reader. I really doubt that. I think all readers are universal, and I think there might not be many of us in the world, but I think we're spread pretty widely. I think no matter where you go, you can, if you scratch the surface of any community, big, medium, or small, I think you'll find dedicated readers. That's what this column is aimed at. Thing number one would be go to the website. Thing number two would be subscribe to the paper so that you can get it delivered to you. They do mail out of state. Of course, this isn't a call to action along these lines if you live in Iowa. If you live in Iowa, this is a shrill demand. If you live in Iowa, of course you must get my column delivered to your house. Of course you must. No matter where in Iowa you live. Now, I understand there's going to be some bad blood because our women in Taylor County are prettier, our men are more capable, our children are all outstanding, and yours aren't. The people in your Iowa county sort of like half-melted trolls by comparison, but you could be big-spirited just this once. Yes, our teenage athletes could destroy your teenage athletes. But in my column, we're not being divisive at all. So that's another thing you could do. That's the shrill demand part here is that if you are in Iowa, then you must subscribe to the Bedford Times Press because that's where you're going to find my column every week. The third thing here, I'm assuming I don't really have to harp on a little codicil to thing number two, which is that if you subscribe to the Bedford Times Press, make sure to tell my editor why you're doing so. That always helps. Any kind of a hack freelance writer is if they get a little bit of votes of confidence from the readership. That always helps. But the third thing is in many ways the most important thing. I want you to do what Bill Rutenberg did. All he did was listen carefully, look around, and put a word in the right ear. If you are in a small town, not just in Iowa, but anywhere, and you are someone you know is close to the little newspaper that I guarantee that county, that district has, feel free to mention to that person that there is a weekly column about all things books by a national and international book reviewer that you happen to know. It's called Ex Libris, and what we want to do here is for the editor of that little newspaper to email the editor of the Bedford Times Press and ask if they can run the column as well. That's what we want. Anyway, I only have one book package, and ordinarily I'd be grumbling about that, but I got my first in-print Iowa newspaper book column in the mail. That rates a high from which I will not be coming down anytime soon. So we'll just do the one package and call it a day. I have a feeling that more mail is coming. There's no way I would get just this one book, especially with the November season underway. Oh my, oh goodness. Okay, this is by Roosevelt Montas, and it's called Rescuing Socrates, How the Great Books Changed My Life and Why They Matter for a New Generation. Rescuing Socrates. They're dying. Let them die. What is the value of a liberal education? Traditionally characterized by a rigorous engagement with the classics of Western thought and literature, this approach to education has been largely supplanted by flexible distribution requirements and ever narrower academic specialization. That's one way you could put it. Yes, indeed. Quite a few institutions of higher academics in America, anyway. Students never encounter Socrates, not in all their time. And if a teacher were to suggest Socrates, the students would get together and have that teacher banned from campus. Dominican-born American academic Roosevelt Montas tells the story of how a liberal education transformed his life and offers an intimate account of the relevance of the great books today, especially to members of historically marginalized communities. Okay, all right. Okay, Socrates almost certainly never met anyone who wasn't Greek personally face to face, and his family owned slaves. So if you're going to rescue him by making him relevant to Twitter politics, you're going to fail. The author emigrated from the Dominican Republic to Queens, New York when he was 12 and encountered the Western classics as an undergraduate at Columbia University's renowned core curriculum, one of America's last remaining great books programs. There are student petitions every year. Every year they have 10,000 more signatures than the year before to get rid of the Great Books program. It won't last long. Not long at all. I'd be willing to bet before this book gets a paperback edition, it will be gone. The experience changed his life and determined his career. He went on to serve as director of Columbia's Center for the Core Curriculum and start a Great Books program for low-income high school students who aspire to be the first in their families to attend college. Oh, man. You know, if you didn't write this book, if you didn't do anything else, you could just stop with that line, and that would be the achievement of a lifetime. You could put that on your gravestone. What a thing. What a thing. Here, let's read it again. As director of Columbia's Center for the Core Curriculum, he started a Great Books program for low-income high school students who aspire to be the first in their families to attend college. All right, well, his book, I don't know. It might be good, might be terrible, but I now like him. Weaving together memoir and literary reflection, Rescuing Socrates describes how 4 authors, Plato, Augustine, that's St. Augustine to you, bub. I don't see any saint before your name. You salute the rank. Okay, not the person. Freud and Gandhi, good Lord, what a quartet, had a profound impact on the author's life. In doing so, the book drives home what it is like to experience a liberal education and why it can still remake lives. Well, okay, that's fantastic. And this comes out in late November. Well, it's going to be a tricky little minefield, isn't it, as a book? For me, it's going to be a tricky little minefield. Will I be able to resist my hot button reactions long enough to appreciate what that book is actually doing? I certainly hope so. Anyway, I don't know. That's not with Steve Pyramid. That's easy. It's Rescuing Socrates, the value of a liberal education, of the value of reading the great books. Fantastic. So we have that, and we have the Vineyard Gazette, and we have the New York Times, and we have the Bedford Times Press. A tiny little newspaper in Taylor County, Iowa, which is the home now of my Ex Libris column. Which I hope, if you read it, you all enjoy it. Absolutely, I hope you do. So I'm going to wrap this up for now. It went on a long time, even though we only had one book. But I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.